They didn't throw me out of my own home. They just made it clear I wasn't welcome. It was a Tuesday afternoon in Brighton, Oregon, the kind of late summer day where the air feels heavy and you can hear the hum of lawnmowers 3 blocks away. I'd just gotten back from the pharmacy, clutching a paper bag of heart medication that keeps my chest from turning into a clenched fist. 3 strokes behind me, surgery looming ahead. My doctor had told me to slow down and avoid stress as if that was something you could just choose to do. The front door was unlocked, which was odd. I stepped inside and froze. Brad, my son-in-law, was sprawled in my recliner, the one Anna, my late wife, gave me for my 60th birthday. He didn't even glance away from the baseball game on TV. "Hey," he called lazily, "you're driving me to the yard tomorrow morning. 6 sharp." I set the pharmacy bag on the coffee table. "I have an appointment at the cardiac clinic at 6:30, I said. "They're checking the stent." "You know that." From the kitchen, my daughter Melissa stepped into the doorway, tea towel in hand, jaw tight. "Dad, Brad needs a ride. This job's important. You can move your appointment." I laughed once, short and bitter. "Move my appointment?" "Melissa, these pills are the only reason I'm not in a hospital bed right now. I can't just—" Brad cut me off without looking at me. "You look fine. Don't be dramatic." Melissa shifted uncomfortably, but didn't defend me. "Dad, we're all under pressure right now. You living here, it's been a lot. We need you to pull your weight." I stared at her. "Pull my weight? I paid off this house. Your mother and I worked 40 years so you could grow up without worrying about a roof over your head." Brad muted the TV. "Look, old man, you want to stay here. You pitch in. That means driving me when I need it. Or you find somewhere else to live." The words hit harder than the strokes ever did. Melissa didn't speak. She didn't tell him to stop. She didn't even meet my eyes. I nodded slowly, as if I were agreeing. "Okay," I said. "I understand." What they didn't see was that my decision had already shifted. It wasn't if I was leaving, it was how. I walked down the hallway, the hardwood creaking under my steps, and opened the closet where my old suitcase waited. I packed 3 shirts, socks, my blood pressure cuff, and the small photo of Anna I kept in a frame by the bed. My notebook, too, filled with every pill dosage, every blood pressure reading, every time my heart had betrayed me. Melissa appeared in the doorway. "Dad, you're really going?" I didn't look up. "You made the rules. I can't follow them without putting myself in the ground." Brad called from the living room, voice dripping with mockery. "Don't slam the door on your way out." I zipped the suitcase and rolled it toward the front door. At the entryway, I dropped my house key into the little ceramic dish shaped like a fish Melissa made it in 3rd grade. For the record, I said, "I paid the final mortgage payment in '09. Your mom cried that day. She said we were free." Neither of them answered. Outside, the evening air felt cooler than it had in months. I loaded the suitcase into my Buick, started the engine, and drove away without looking back. The porch light came on behind me, set to a timer I'd installed years ago for Anna. It felt like an eye watching me leave. I drove past the old mill where I'd worked 30 years, past the bakery where the kid with the eyebrow ring always calls me sir. Brighton was one of those towns where people know your name, but somehow my own family had forgotten who I was. I checked into a motel off Route 9, the Pineview Inn. The clerk barely looked up from his phone when he handed me a key. "Ice machine's busted," he mumbled. "That's fine," I said. My voice didn't sound like mine. Inside, I set the suitcase on the bed and the pill bottles on the nightstand. The clock on the wall ticked too loudly. I sat there for a long time, thinking about the years I'd said yes, without hesitation. College tuition, car repairs, their wedding, their first down payment. Every time they asked, I gave. I had been a bank with a pulse. Not anymore. I opened my flip phone and scrolled to a number I hadn't used in years, Ray Hollis. An old friend from my mill days. Ray had a way of finding things paperwork people wanted hidden, loopholes they hoped no one would notice. He picked up on the second ring. "Hail. Been a while. I need to know my options," I said. "What kind?" "The kind they don't teach in Sunday school." A pause. "You okay?" "I will be," I said. Melissa and Brad made it clear. Drive him around or get out. I'm not fit to drive anyone. And they're not lifting a finger to help me with treatment. Ray's tone changed lower, sharper. House still in your name? Every letter. Deeds in my safe deposit box. Good. First thing tomorrow, lock down your accounts. Pull anything they have access to. If Brod's driving your truck, take him off the policy tonight. And Hale, yeah, people who think they own you won't stop unless you show them you're serious. I'm serious, I said. By morning, I was at the bank when the doors opened. I froze every joint account, canceled every automatic payment, and rerouted the rest. By the time I walked back into the rain, the ties were cut. That's when the call started. First Melissa, soft-voiced and questioning. Then Brad, loud and demanding. By Friday, there were over 20 missed calls. I didn't answer a single one. But that night, there was a knock on my motel door, 3 sharp hits that rattled the chain. A man's voice came through, too close to the wood. Hale, open up. We need to talk. I didn't move at first. Just sat there on the bed, staring at the door as if my eyes could burn a hole through it. The knock came again, 3 hard, deliberate thuds that made the thin wood shake. Hale, the voice said again, low and impatient. Don't make me stand out here all night. I knew that voice. Brad. I slid my wallet into my back pocket and moved quietly to the dresser. The motel room smelled faintly of bleach and stale air. My heart thumped not from fear, but from the rush of knowing I was in control for the first time in years. I unlocked the chain, but kept the deadbolt in place. The door opened a crack, just enough for me to see his face, red from the cold night air, jaw set like he was about to deliver orders. What do you want, Brad? I asked, my voice calm, almost bored. You've got everyone in a panic, he said, leaning closer. Melissa's crying, bills are piling up, and you're out here playing hide and seek. We need to talk. I told Melissa I was leaving. She didn't seem to mind. Cut the crap, he snapped. We need your accounts unlocked. Mortgage payments due, the utilities. That's your problem now. I started to close the door. He shoved against it, but the deadbolt held. His eyes flashed. You think you can just pull the rug out from under us? After everything we've done for you. I almost laughed at the irony. Brad, you've been using me as a wallet and a chauffeur. You've done nothing for Make's uptake. His expression shifted, less anger, more calculation. You're making a mistake, old man. This'll get ugly. I shut the door in his face, slid the chain back, and listened to his footsteps retreat down the hallway. For a long time, I sat in the motel chair, phone in hand. Ray had told me the first moves would rattle them, but I didn't expect Brad to show up this fast. That meant they were already desperate. Desperate people make mistakes. The next morning, I drove to the county clerk's office. My safe deposit box held more than the house deed. It held every property tax record, insurance policy, and loan document I'd kept over the years. I'd been meticulous, partly out of habit, partly because Anna had always said, keep the papers, someday they'll matter. Now they did. I had the clerk make certified copies of every document. Then I visited Ray at his small office above a pawn shop. His desk was a mess, stacks of manila folders, coffee mugs with rings in the bottom, and an ancient typewriter pushed to one side. Let's start here, I said, laying the papers out. House, insurance, vehicle titles. Everything they think they've got a claim to. Ray flipped through them, whistling low. This is cleaner than I thought. All in your name. And if I read this right, he tapped one page. You've still got the mineral rights on that land out by Sandridge? I nodded. Never sold them. A slow smile spread across his face. Brad and Melissa have no idea what that's worth, do they? They think it's just a patch of dirt. Ray leaned back in his chair. Then they're about to find out how wrong they are. First, we secure the titles. Then, we make sure if they try anything, any forged signatures, any sneaky transfers, they hit a wall so hard they bounce. We worked for hours. By the time I left, every document had been locked down tighter than a bank vault. If Brad or Melissa tried to touch a single asset, they'd be flagged instantly. Back at the motel, my phone lit up again, Melissa this time. I let it ring out, but her voicemail played anyway. Dad, I don't know why you're doing this. Brad's been under a lot of stress. We've been trying to hold things together. Just, please call me back. There was a pause before she hung up, and for a moment I almost felt something crack inside me. But then I remembered her standing in the kitchen, letting Brad order me around in my own house. That night, I took a drive through Brighton, past the old mill, past the park where Melissa learned to ride her bike, past the house, my house, where I could see lights glowing in the windows. A shadow moved past the curtain in the living room. They were inside, warm and comfortable. I was out here in the cold. I parked down the street, engine off, and sat in silence. My mind was already building the next move, one that would make them realize they hadn't just lost my money. They'd lost me. And once I started, there'd be no going back. I woke before dawn, the kind of early where the world feels hollow and quiet, like it's holding its breath. The motel's heater rattled in the corner, fighting the February chill. I didn't bother with breakfast. I had a plan, and plans have their own hunger. Ray had given me a list, a series of steps that looked simple on paper, but once set in motion, would choke Brad and Melissa's comfortable little life like weeds around a fence post. Step 1 was already done, locking down the deeds and titles. Step 2 would hurt them where they lived, literally. By 8 o'clock, I was standing in the lobby of Brighton Federal Bank. I'd opened my first account here back when people still knew the tellers by name. Now, the faces had changed, but the policies hadn't. With the right forms and ID, and I had both, I could remove my name from the joint account Melissa had talked me into for convenience 3 years ago. The manager, a neatly dressed woman named Clara, slid the paperwork across the desk. Once this is processed, they'll have no access to your funds, Mr. Hale. That's the idea, I said, signing slowly. And close the linked credit cards too. Effective immediately. Her pen paused. Those balances will become their responsibility. I met her eyes. I know. From there, I drove to the insurance office. My homeowner's policy had a clause that allowed me to suspend coverage if the property was vacant or if I no longer lived there. Technically, I wasn't living there. Technically, I could pull the policy and leave them scrambling to find a new one at twice the rate. The agent tried to talk me out of it. Without coverage, any damage, fire, storm comes straight out of pocket. That's fine, I said. It's not my pocket anymore. By lunchtime, I'd stripped them of access to my money, cut their credit line, and left their house uninsured. I could almost feel the ripples moving through their day, even if they didn't know the cause yet. But the real strike came later. Ray had been digging into Brad's business, small-time contracting work, the kind that lived or died on reputation. Turns out, Brad had a nasty habit of padding invoices and cutting corners. A few quiet calls to the right people, former clients who'd been overcharged, inspectors who'd looked the other way, would stir things up fast. That evening, Ray called. 2 of his biggest clients are reevaluating their agreements. That's polite talk 4. We're about to drop him. Good, I said, leaning back in the stiff motel chair. Let him feel the ground shift under his feet. Ray chuckled. You're colder than I thought. No, I said. Just done being the guy everyone thinks will take the hit and keep smiling. At 9 p.m., my phone buzzed. This time I answered. Melissa's voice was sharp. Dad, what are you doing? Brad's furious. The bank says you pulled the accounts, the credit cards are dead, and our insurance just got canceled. That's right, I said evenly. You can't just, I can. And I did. There was a long silence, then, you're ruining us. No, Melissa, I said quietly. I'm just giving you what you've been giving me for years, nothing. I hung up before she could answer. But as I sat there, staring at the dark window, I knew this was only the middle game. They could still recover if I stopped now. If I wanted this to stick, I had to go further, hit them in a way that wouldn't just knock them down, but keep them there. And I already knew exactly how. I'd learned a long time ago that money wounds people quickly, but reputation wounds them permanently. Brad thrived on image. His business website showed him in a hard hat, shaking hands with smiling clients, standing in front of newly renovated buildings. He lived for being the reliable guy in a small town where word traveled faster than the wind. So, that's where I'd hit him next. Ray and I spent 2 days quietly building a file. We pulled county inspection records, which showed exactly how many of Brad's finished jobs had failed to meet code. We tracked down 3 former clients who'd been charged for premium materials, but got cheap substitutes instead. One of them, a widow named Carol, had kept every receipt, every email, every text. When I showed her the printouts, she leaned back in her chair. I always knew he cheated me. You make sure people know. I promised her I would. Ray packaged it all neatly, dates, photos, testimonies, and sent it to 2 local reporters he trusted. He also gave a copy to the licensing board. Within 48 hours, Brad's smiling face appeared on the local news, under the headline, "Local Contractor Under Investigation for Fraudulent Practices." I watched the segment from my motel room. The reporter listed every allegation, each one cutting into Brad's carefully crafted image. They even had footage of Carol holding up a piece of warped siding, pointing to where the wood beneath had rotted because he'd skipped the protective sealant. By the time the broadcast ended, my phone was ringing again. "You think this is funny?" Brad's voice was pure venom. "I think it's justice," I said. "You built a house of cards, Brad. I just gave the wind a push." "You've made enemies you can't handle," he snapped. "I'm 71 years old," I said flatly. "You think I'm scared of you?" He cursed and hung up. That night, I took a drive past the house again. Only this time, there was a for sale sign staked into the yard. It hadn't been there before. I smiled. Maybe it was panic. Maybe it was strategy. Either way, it meant they were hurting. The next morning, Ray called with something better. "Remember those mineral rights you still hold out by Sandridge?" "Of course." "Well, I made a few inquiries. There's a company interested in leasing them for exploratory drilling. Big money, Hale. And here's the best part. They'll pay you a signing bonus just to lock it down." "How big?" "6 figures big." I leaned back, letting the number settle in my mind. Brad and Melissa had probably assumed that land was worthless. They'd never once asked about it. "Do it," I said. Ray laughed. "Oh, I'm doing it. But when the deal closes, you make sure word gets back to them. Let them know exactly what they lost." It was almost too perfect, a steady income stream they could have had if they hadn't burned every bridge between us. By the end of the week, the lease was signed. The check sat in my account, untouchable to anyone but me. I thought that might be enough. I thought maybe I'd proven my point. But then I got a letter in the mail, forwarded from my old address. It was from Melissa. No apology. No acknowledgement. Just a cold request for me to reconsider and release some funds to help stabilize the family. That was when I knew this wasn't over. If they still thought they could manipulate me after all this, then they hadn't learned anything yet. It was time for the final lesson. The letter was typed, not handwritten. That alone told me everything I needed to know. It wasn't an olive branch, it was a business memo, written in the language of someone who still thought this was a negotiation. I read it twice slowly, then folded it back into the envelope. Melissa's words were polite on the surface, but underneath they dripped with entitlement. "It's in everyone's best interest. We just need temporary support. You owe it to your family. Owe it to your family." For years, I'd shouldered mortgages, car loans, tuition payments. I'd patched their mistakes quietly, telling myself that's what fathers did. But here was the truth. When I needed family, they'd locked the door and turned off the porch light. No, I didn't owe them a thing. Still, her letter did something I didn't expect. It sharpened my focus. Until then, my actions had been about reclaiming what was mine. Now, it became about making sure they could never do to anyone else what they did to me. Ray met me at the diner the next morning. He slid into the booth with his usual smirk, a man who enjoyed the hunt more than the kill. "They're running out of air," he said, dropping a file folder in front of me. Inside were printouts from court databases, property listings, and business license records. "They've listed the house at $40,000 less than market," he continued. "Means they're desperate to unload it. Brad's contractor license is under review, and 3 clients have already filed formal complaints." "Good," I said. "But I want this to be over in one clean shot. No slow bleed. I want it to end." Ray leaned back. "Then you'll like this. Remember that shell company Brad used for side jobs?" I did. He bragged about it once over dinner, calling it tax smart. "Well," Ray said, "turns out it's in default with the state. Missed filings. Unpaid fees. If someone were to file a complaint about improper business operations, it wouldn't just be a fine. They'd shut it down and make it public record. My coffee had gone cold, but I drank it anyway, eyes never leaving his. Do it. Over the next week, Ray moved like a ghost. A call here, a packet of documents there. He never used my name, never left a trace. By Thursday, Brad's company was officially under investigation. The notice hit the state's public database that same afternoon. I didn't have to wait long for the fallout. Friday morning, I was eating scrambled eggs in the motel cafe when the local news cut in with a breaking story banner. Brad's face filled the screen again, this time, not as a respected contractor, but as the owner of a shuttered business accused of illegal operations. They even showed the front door of his office with a bright orange notice of closure taped to the glass. I took another bite of eggs and kept watching. The reporter mentioned anonymous tips leading to the investigation. I almost laughed. That evening, my phone lit up with Melissa's number. I didn't answer. 10 minutes later, Brad called. Straight to voicemail. Then came the texts. You've gone too far. We can fix this if you'll just talk. This isn't fair. I sat there in the dim motel room, reading each message until the phone went still. Fair. I thought about the night I sat outside my own locked house while my daughter and her husband drank wine in the kitchen, pretending I didn't exist. I thought about the way they'd brushed off my calls, the way Melissa had turned her eyes away when Brad mocked me. Fair was never part of the deal. The next day, I took a drive. Not past the house this time. There was nothing left there for me. Instead, I went out to the ridge, where my mineral rights were quietly making me more money than I'd seen in years. The drilling site was just a fenced lot now, with survey flags fluttering in the wind. But standing there, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Peace. My revenge was almost complete. But there was one more thing, one last strike that would etch the lesson into stone. Not a financial blow. Not a legal move. Something personal. Something they'd remember every time they heard my name. I'd been turning it over in my head for weeks, what that final strike should look like. Money was easy. Legal trouble was straightforward. But a truly personal blow? That required precision. It needed to land in a place where pride lived, and it had to be public enough that they couldn't pretend it never happened. The answer came one rainy Tuesday, sitting in the back of the library. I wasn't there for books. I was there for the archives, old newspapers, property tax rolls, city council meeting notes. My town had a habit of treating certain events like gospel, and once something was printed in the local press, it became part of the town's permanent memory. I started piecing together a timeline not of my revenge so far, but of their entire history with me. The birthday parties I'd paid for. The business loans I'd quietly covered. The college tuition checks. Every dollar, every favor, every time I'd stepped in when they'd fallen short. I had proof for almost all of it, bank transfers, handwritten notes, even thank you cards for Melissa that felt bitter to read now. Then, on the other side of the page, I wrote down every time they'd cut me out, mocked me, or taken from me without a word. The locked doors. The stolen pension payments. The smirking comments about how the old man didn't understand how things worked anymore. When I stepped back, the contrast was brutal. I knew exactly how to use it. Ray raised his eyebrows when I told him. You're going to publish it? Not in the way you think, I said. Our town had an annual charity gala in late spring. It was a big deal, fancy venue, speeches, local business leaders shaking hands and pretending to like each other. Brad had attended every year since he started his business, always buying a table near the front, always getting his photo in the paper. This year, the event was honoring long-term community contributors. The organizer was an old friend of mine from my volunteer days. When I asked if I could donate toward the event in exchange for a short speaking slot, she didn't hesitate. Hale, you've done more for this town than most people twice over. We'd be honored. Perfect. On the night of the gala, I wore my best suit, a charcoal one that still fit me just right. I didn't tell anyone I'd be speaking. My name wasn't on the printed program. Brad and Melissa were there, of course. She wore a deep red dress, the kind meant to make an entrance. He shook hands like a politician, grinning for every camera. But I noticed his smile falter when he saw me. Halfway through the evening, the NC announced my name. A ripple went through the room. People hadn't expected me to speak. I walked to the stage slowly, letting the silence grow. I didn't need a speech in front of me. I'd been writing it in my head for months. I've lived in this town for 71 years, I began. I've worked its jobs, walked its streets, raised my family here. And like many of you, I've learned that the measure of a person isn't in the wealth they collect, it's in the promises they keep. I told them about helping young couples get their first home, about covering a stranger's hospital bill, about funding school programs when budgets fell short. The crowd nodded along. Some clapped. Then I shifted. But sometimes, I said, my voice sharpening, you give to people who only take. You teach them loyalty, and they teach you betrayal. You lift them up, and they use that height to look down on you. I've learned the hard way that generosity without respect is just fuel for greed. I didn't name Brad or Melissa. I didn't have to. My examples were specific enough that half the room turned their heads toward them anyway. Brad's jaw tightened. Melissa stared at her wine glass. I ended with this. I stand here tonight not to ask for sympathy, but to make a promise. From this day forward, I will give only to those who give back. I will invest only in hands that do not take. And for those who've built their comfort on the bones of others, your foundation will not hold. Not now. Not ever. The applause was quiet at first, then spread. I stepped down from the stage, my eyes locking with Brad's across the room. He didn't move. The next morning, the local paper ran a photo of me at the podium, with the headline, Ward's speech draws standing ovation at annual gala. The article quoted me almost word for word. It was all public now, and in a small town, once it's public, it's permanent. That night, I got one more message from Melissa. Just 5 words, you've ruined us completely. I didn't reply, because that was the point. Melissa's text, you've ruined us completely, should have felt like the finish line. But in truth, it was just a status report. They weren't ruined yet. Not completely. Not in the way I wanted. I didn't just want them broke. I wanted them forgotten. I wanted their names to carry the kind of weight that makes people cross the street rather than say hello. Ray's call came 3 days later, right after sunrise. You sitting down? He asked. Go ahead, I said, sipping my coffee. Brad's main supplier just cut him off. Won't extend credit, won't even sell to him at full price. Says it's a reputation issue. I didn't laugh out loud, but I smiled so hard my jaw hurt. So, no materials? No materials, no contracts. He's dead in the water, Ray said. With the debt load he's carrying, the bank's gonna start circling. I could have stopped there. That would have been enough for most people, let the vultures pick the bones clean. But Brad and Melissa had spent years using me as their personal ATM, their fallback plan, their easy mark. And when they drained me, they'd mocked me for ever helping them in the first place. No, they didn't get to just lose. They had to be exposed. That's when I went to my second drawer, the one in my desk that had been locked for months. Inside was a neat folder of documents, bank statements, ledger pages, scanned receipts. Proof that Brad had been moving money from his business account into personal luxuries, Melissa's boutique, their trips to Napa, the kitchen remodel, all while claiming those same expenses as operational costs. The best part? None of this had come from me snooping. His own accountant, Wallace, had accidentally sent the wrong files when I'd innocently asked for help understanding contractor tax codes. I'd thanked him politely, told him I'd hold on to them in case they were useful. Now they were useful. I sent the package to the State Contractor Oversight Division and CC'd the IRS tip line for good measure. No name, no return address. They didn't need to know who sent it. The evidence spoke loud enough. The investigation started quietly. Then the letters came. Then the phone calls. Within 6 weeks, Brad's contractor's license was suspended. The sign out front came down. Employees stopped showing up. Melissa's boutique, entirely dependent on Brad's profits, shuttered within days. But here's the thing about financial collapse. It doesn't happen in silence. It echoes. Their so-called friends, the ones who'd been more than happy to drink their wine and pose in their Instagram-perfect kitchen, stopped returning calls. Invitations dried up. Their names, once dropped to open doors, now closed them. People in town started using Brad as shorthand for don't trust him. I got front row seats to the unraveling. At the grocery store, I overheard Melissa arguing with the cashier because her card was declined. She left a half-full cart behind and walked out, eyes on the floor. At the gas station, Brad stood there pumping $10 worth into his truck, a man who used to fill the tank without even looking at the price. And then there was the diner. I was halfway through a cup of black coffee when Brad walked in. The place went still, not out of respect, but avoidance. People kept talking, but their eyes slid away from him. Conversations shifted so obviously that even he noticed. He spotted me in the corner. For a moment, he just stood there, breathing like he'd been running. Then he walked over. "You happy now?" he said, his voice a low rasp. I didn't flinch. Happier than I've been in years. His eyes were bloodshot, the skin under them sagging. "You think this is over?" I set my cup down, slow and deliberate. "No, Brad. I know it's over. You're out of credit, out of work, out of friends. And the best part? You did it to yourself." All I did was hold up the mirror. He stared at me, and for a moment, I thought he might swing. But he looked around at the booths full of people watching, none of them on his side, and turned away. He left without ordering. That was the last time I saw him in public. Melissa lasted longer, popping up here and there, but always alone. People whispered that she was selling jewelry, clothes, even furniture, just to keep the lights on. Their house went on the market again, this time with a foreclosure notice nailed to the front. I could have bought it. I could have walked through those doors with cash in hand and taken the very floors they'd once refused to let me step on. But I didn't. Better to let strangers live there, people who'd never know Brad or Melissa had been anybody. They wanted me gone from their lives. Now they were the ones erased. And I was still here. You'd think watching them sink would have been enough. For months, I let it run its course, their slow, public collapse. But there was one last thing I needed to do, not out of spite, but to make sure they could never claw their way back using someone else the way they'd used me. It started with a phone call to an old friend in banking, someone who'd been in the room when I signed my very first mortgage. She owed me a favor. I just want to make sure, I told her. If their names ever come up for a loan, a lease, even a store credit card, I want red flags flashing so bright you can see them from the parking lot. She chuckled. Consider it done. They won't be able to finance a lawnmower. That was step one. Step two was quieter and more satisfying. I wrote a letter, not an email, not a text. Ink on paper. It was addressed to Melissa's parents, the ones who'd once looked at me with that polite condescension, as if I was lucky their daughter had tolerated me in her life. The letter was simple. A few sentences. You should know the truth about your daughter and son-in-law. The debts, the fraud, the way they've treated people who trusted them. I'm not asking you to take my side. I'm just making sure you're not next. I didn't sign my name. I didn't have to. Weeks later, I heard through the grapevine that Melissa's parents had cut her off completely, no money, no help, not even a place to stay, just until things get better. And things never did get better. The last move came almost by accident. I was having coffee at the diner, the same corner booth where Brad had confronted me months earlier, when a young contractor I knew sat down across from me. "You know Brad's trying to start over in another county," he said. "Is that right?" I asked. "Yeah, but folks out there are cautious. Word travels." He smirked. Can't imagine why. I could. That night, I sent one final anonymous package to the local paper in that county, a tidy collection of public records, old news clippings, and a neat little summary of unresolved legal questions around Brad's business practices. I didn't editorialize. I didn't need to. The facts were poison enough. By the time the article ran, his fresh start was dead before it began. I didn't hear about them again for almost a year. Then, one gray November morning, I saw a moving truck outside the tiny rental house they'd been living in. No friends helping, no family around. Just Brad, older and heavier, shoving boxes into the truck bed. Melissa stood by the curb, holding a chipped lamp. They didn't look at each other. I sat in my truck a block away, engine off, watching. Not with joy, not with pity, just closure. This was never about making them feel the pain I'd felt. That kind of hurt can't be mirrored. This was about making sure they could never, ever do it again to me or to anyone else. As the truck pulled away, I started my engine, drove past them without slowing down. Melissa glanced up for half a second, like she thought she might recognize the vehicle. Then she looked away. Good. I didn't want to be remembered by them. I wanted to be the shadow that moved through their downfall, the one they could never quite name but always feel. And now my work was done. I went home, poured myself a coffee, and sat on the porch as the sun came up. For the first time in years, I felt no weight on my chest, no gnawing anger under my ribs. They were gone from my life. And I was still here. Not just alive, untouchable,